Commander Tazvex, of the Xinthian species, pressed his six-fingered hand against the observation window, his silvery eyes narrowing as he watched the newest addition to the Coalition medical facility. The human moved with surprising efficiency, organizing medical supplies with methodical precision that seemed at odds with what the commander had read about Earth's primitive medical practices. "That's him? The C-class medic from Earth?" Commander Tazvex asked, his voice carrying the slight musical undertone characteristic of his species. Director Xylos, the facility's administrator and a fellow Xinthian with more elaborate cranial ridges denoting higher status, nodded. "Arrived yesterday through the exchange program. Calls himself Jackson Moore. Doesn't look like much," observed Security Chief Grawl, a hulking Valaxian whose natural armor plates shifted slightly as he crossed his massive arms. The movement caused light to dance across the iridescent blue-green surface of his exoskeleton. Soft skin, no natural defenses. Typical human. Director Xylos tilted his head in what passed for a Xinthian shrug. The Coalition Council insisted we include at least one human in our facility. Something about fostering interspecies medical cooperation. Their primitive techniques occasionally have unexpected applications. Jackson Moore, oblivious to the scrutiny, continued his inventory. His movements were crisp and practiced, almost military in their precision. For a moment, Security Chief Grawl's eyes narrowed slightly, but he quickly dismissed whatever thought had crossed his mind. "The human stays in the medical bay," Grawl rumbled. "My security team has enough to worry about without babysitting a fragile Earth medic." Director Xylos nodded in agreement. He's been assigned to basic triage and wound management. Nothing critical, nothing that could endanger patients if their unusual physiology proved challenging. Behind them, a young Medusan aide hurried into the observation room, her translucent tentacles fluttering in agitation. "Director, urgent transmission from Coalition Intelligence," she said, her voice modulator translating her natural ultrasonic communication. "The Iron Scale Marauders have been detected in the Vegas sector. 3 Coalition outposts have already been raided." Commander Tazvex stiffened. "The Vegas sector? That's barely 2 light jumps from our position. Proximity is concerning." Director Xylos agreed, his silver eyes darkening to gunmetal gray, a Xinthian sign of alarm. "But our facility is well hidden and protected. The Marauders have never targeted medical installations before." Security Chief Grawl let out a sound halfway between a snort and a growl. "The Iron Scales aren't known for consistency. Their cybernetic enhancements make them unpredictable. I'll increase security patrols immediately." As the officers disbanded to prepare for potential threats, none of them noticed the human medic in the room below glance up at the observation window, his eyes briefly hard and calculating before returning to their previously mild expression. The next morning found Dr. Alara Tin, the facility's Althean xenophysiologist, watching in undisguised curiosity as Jackson performed what he called his morning routine in one of the facility's exercise chambers. Unlike the carefully calibrated mental and physical harmonization exercises preferred by most of the facility's staff, Jackson's routine was intense. Push-ups, pull-ups, sprints, and what appear to be combat maneuvers executed with perfect form. "Is this standard for human medical personnel?" she asked, her iridescent scales shimmering with interest. Jackson barely broke his rhythm as he completed a set of one-armed push-ups. "Not necessarily. Just something I picked up during my training. It seems more suited to military personnel than a healer," she observed. Jackson transitioned smoothly to a series of stretches. "On Earth, we have a saying, healthy body, healthy mind. Besides, you never know when you might need to carry an injured patient to safety." Alara's head tilted, a gesture she'd adopted from working with mammals. "How practical. Though I notice your movements resemble combat forms rather than functional strength training." A flicker of something, caution perhaps, crossed Jackson's face before he smiled. "Just old habits from basic training. All Earth medical personnel receive standardized physical conditioning." Before Alara could probe further, The facility's alert system pulsed. Not an emergency, but a notification of incoming patients. Both medics hurried to the triage center. 3 coalition scouts had encountered what they described as advanced elements of the Iron Scale Marauders. While they'd escaped, 2 had sustained injuries. One with a deep laceration across his thoracic cavity, the other with partially crystallized tissue from experimental weapon. Jackson was assigned to assist Dr. Tin with the laceration case, a Thraxian scout whose bluish-green blood seeped through temporary field bandages. As they worked, Alara couldn't help but notice the human's unexpected familiarity with combat wounds. Clean entry and exit, Jackson murmured, administering pain blockers with practiced ease. Serrated edge, probably a vibrational dagger. No poison, but there's micro-shrapnel embedded in the surrounding tissue. Alara blinked in surprise. That's a remarkably accurate assessment. Jackson shrugged without looking up from the wound. I've seen similar injuries before. In a C-class medical facility on Earth. Alara asked skeptically. The human's hands remained steady as he extracted nearly microscopic fragments from the wound. You'd be surprised what comes through an emergency department on a Saturday night. His tone was light, but something in his eyes made Alara wonder. Over the following days, more patients arrived as skirmishes with the Iron Scales increased along the sector's borders. Each case seemed to reveal another unexpected facet of Jackson's abilities. He demonstrated knowledge of blast trauma patterns that surprised even the veteran combat medics. His ability to stabilize critical patients in seconds bordered on uncanny, and his familiarity with various weapons systems' effects on different alien physiologies raised quiet questions among the staff. 9 days after Jackson's arrival, Dr. Tin and 3 other medical staff were having lunch when Security Chief Grawl joined them, his massive frame making the standard issue chair creak ominously. The human concerns me, Grawl stated without preamble, lowering his voice despite being in the officer's mess. Dr. Kylos, a spindly Arcturian neurologist, flexed his antenna in agreement. I observed him yesterday, treating a Segovian with internal burns. He identified the weapon type from the burn pattern alone, a Krell disruptor rifle, modified for tissue liquefaction. That's not knowledge they teach in basic medical training. I checked his file, Grawl rumbled. It states he served at an urban trauma center on Earth before joining the exchange program. Nothing about military service or weapons training. Perhaps human trauma centers are different, suggested Alara, though she too had been cataloging her observations. Their planet is notoriously violent. Perhaps, Grawl conceded, not sounding convinced. But yesterday, he correctly identified a security vulnerability in our patient quarantine protocol within minutes of reviewing it. When I questioned him, he claimed it was just an observation. The conversation paused as, across the mess hall, they watched Jackson deal with an agitated Brancian patient who had escaped from the recovery ward. The alien was nearly twice Jackson's size, with 4 powerful arms and a well-documented hostility toward non-Brancians when disoriented. What happened next left them staring. Rather than calling security, Jackson approached the agitated alien with calm confidence. When the Brancian lunged, Jackson sidestepped with surprising speed, then executed a precise pressure point technique on the alien's secondary nerve cluster, a vulnerable spot few non-Brancians even knew existed. The Brancian froze, then collapsed gently into a sedated state. Pressure point technique on a Brancian warrior cast, Grawl muttered. Targeting a nerve cluster that isn't covered in any public xenobiology text. Dr. Kalos's antennae quivered. The human is not what he appears to be. 2 days later, as tension in the facility continued to build with each new report of iron scale activity, Jackson found himself cornered by Director Xylos and Security Chief Grawl in a quiet corridor. Mr. Moore, the director began formally, we've noticed some inconsistencies in your operational profile. Jackson maintained a neutral expression. I'm not sure I understand, Director. Your knowledge base exceeds C-class certification, Grawl stated bluntly. Your combat awareness and physical conditioning are inconsistent with standard medical training. Your file mentions nothing about military background, yet you demonstrate tactical thinking and threat assessment reflexes. I'm adaptable, Jackson replied simply. Earth medicine can be demanding. Director Xylos made the Xynthian gesture that indicated disbelief. We're considering requesting clarification from Earth authorities about your actual qualifications. Something subtle changed in Jackson's stance. Nothing threatening, but a slight shift in balance that both aliens recognized subconsciously as readiness. That would be your prerogative, Jackson said carefully. But I assure you, I'm here to help. Nothing more. The conversation was interrupted by a facility-wide alert. Another group of wounded incoming from a border skirmish. As they hurried toward the medical bay, none of them noticed the faint electromagnetic disturbance rippling through the facility's security grid, the first sign of the impending attack. The first explosion ripped through the facility's eastern security barrier shortly after midnight. The second knocked out the main power core 3 minutes later, leaving only emergency systems operational. By the time the third explosion breached the main entrance, pandemonium had erupted throughout the medical facility. Security Chief Grall's voice boomed over the emergency channel. All non-security personnel evacuate to safety bunkers. Ironscale forces have breached sectors 1 through 4. They've disabled our defensive grid. In the Central Medical Ward, Jackson was already moving with surprising calm, securing critical patients and organizing the medical staff for evacuation. Alara, take the Althean patients through the secondary evacuation route, he ordered, his voice carrying unquestioned authority. Their light sensitivity will make them vulnerable if the iron scales deploy flash grenades. Dr. Kylos, the neurological patients need priority evacuation. Use the service tunnels. What about you? Dr. Tin asked, noting that Jackson was moving against the flow of evacuating personnel. Someone needs to secure the experimental regeneration drugs, he replied. If the iron scales get those, they could enhance their cybernetics beyond anything we've seen. Before she could protest, Jackson had disappeared down a corridor, moving with purpose. What Alara didn't see was him detour into a supply closet, emerging moments later with a medical bag that seemed oddly heavy. His expression had changed completely, no longer the somewhat deferential exchange medic, but something harder, more focused. In the command center, Security Chief Grall watched in dismay as the facility's remaining defenses failed one by one. 3 of his security teams were already down, and the iron scales were advancing methodically toward the central laboratories. Where are the coalition reinforcements? He demanded. A communications officer shook her head. Still 20 minutes out, sir. The iron scales are jamming long-range signals. We won't last 20 minutes, Grall growled. On the security feeds, he could see the iron scales, brutish humanoids with metallic scales implanted directly into their flesh and glowing cybernetic enhancements protruding from their bodies. They moved with the perfect coordination of beings linked by neural networks, each one a deadly combination of organic ferocity and mechanical precision. Suddenly, one of the few remaining security feeds showed movement in the east corridor. Not an iron scale, but a human figure moving purposefully toward the advancing intruders. Is that the Earth medic? Someone asked incredulously. Grall stared at the screen in disbelief. What in the 7 moons does he think he's doing? Jackson moved silently through the darkened corridors, the weight of the medical bag comfortable in his hand. The sounds of combat echoed through the facility. Energy weapons discharging, the occasional explosion, and the distinctive mechanical whir of iron-scale cybernetics. He paused an intersection, listening intently. 3 iron scales were approaching from the left corridor, their cybernetically enhanced movements creating a distinctive rhythm. Without hesitation, Jackson reached into his bag and removed what appeared to be a standard medical injector. With practiced movements, he modified the pressure settings, replaced the therapeutic cartridge with something from a hidden compartment, then pressed himself against the wall beside the doorway. The first iron scale that stepped through received a point-blank injection to the junction between organic tissue and cybernetic implant. The raider convulsed as the concentrated compound, designed to promote rapid cell growth in trauma patients, caused an immediate rejection response in the cybernetic interface. Before the other two could react, Jackson had already swept the legs of the second and delivered a precise blow to the neural implant at the base of the third skull. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. Jackson continued through the facility, each encounter following a similar pattern. A surgical laser, designed for microcision procedures, sliced through cybernetic control units. A portable defibrillator, recalibrated to emit a specific electromagnetic pulse, disabled neural networks. Medical adhesive, capable of sealing critical wounds in seconds, jammed weapons mechanisms and mobility joints. In the security center, the remaining officers watched in stunned silence as security feed after security feed showed the aftermath of Jackson's passage. Disabled iron scales, many still alive but incapacitated, sprawled in corridors where elite security teams had failed to stop them. "That's not standard medical training," whispered an aide. "No," Grawl agreed grimly. "That's something else entirely." The turning point came when Jackson encountered the iron scale. Leader, a massive figure nearly 8 feet tall, with over 60% of his body replaced by advanced cybernetics. He stood in the central laboratory, downloading research data while 2 lieutenants gathered experimental compounds. Jackson entered silently, assessing the situation in seconds. The leader spotted him almost immediately, cybernetic eye glowing red as targeting systems engaged. A human. The iron scale's voice was partially synthesized, a disturbing blend of organic and artificial. "The Coalition sends a single human to stop us." Jackson set down his medical bag calmly. "I'm actually just a medic, but I'm going to have to ask you to step away from those compounds. They're not stable for transport." The iron scale leader laughed, a harsh, mechanically distorted sound. "A medic? Then you've made a serious navigational error. This is combat, little human, not a medical emergency." Jackson's expression remained neutral. You'd be surprised how often those things overlap. The leader signaled his lieutenants, who moved to flank Jackson. "Kill him. Quickly." What followed defied the expectations of everyone watching through the security feeds. Jackson moved like no medic any of them had ever seen. Each motion precise, economical, and devastatingly effective. He seemed to know exactly where to strike to disrupt the interface between organic and cybernetic systems, which control nodes were vulnerable, which hydraulic systems would fail under specific pressure. A precision strike to a neural junction. An improvised chemical compound injected into a cooling system. A medical scanner repurposed to overload targeting implants. The lieutenants went down in under a minute. The leader, enraged, deployed additional weapons systems, a shoulder-mounted plasma cannon emerging from cybernetic housing, targeting arrays glowing ominously. "What the hell are you?" he demanded. Jackson dodged the first plasma burst, the superheated energy scorching the wall behind him. "I told you, I'm a medic. No medic fights like this." Jackson allowed himself a small, grim smile. "You've never met a combat medic from Earth Special Forces, then?" The battle that followed was brief, but spectacular. Jackson used the laboratory itself as a weapon. Chemical compounds, pressure systems, even basic physics exploited with lethal efficiency. When the plasma cannon prepared to fire again, Jackson had already calculated the trajectory, positioning himself so the blast would hit a canister of highly reactive cooling agent. The resulting explosion knocked both combatants across the room, but only one had anticipated it. Jackson rolled with the blast, protected by a hastily deployed med shield. The iron scale leader took the brunt of the explosion, his cybernetic systems shorting out in cascading failure. As emergency lights bathed the scene in pulsing red, Jackson stood over the fallen leader. His formerly pristine medical uniform was torn and spattered with a distinctive blue-black fluid that served as blood in the iron scale's partially organic systems. The substance covered his hands, face, and chest, stark evidence of the close-quarters nature of the fight. It was this scene that met Director Xylos, Security Chief Grawl, and the first wave of Coalition reinforcements as they entered the laboratory. They stopped short at the doorway, staring at the carnage, and at the blood-covered human standing calmly in the center of it. "I think this one needs immediate medical attention," Jackson said, gesturing to the Iron Scale leader who lay twitching as his systems failed. "The others are mostly incapacitated, not killed. I've applied temporary stasis patches to prevent their cybernetics from initiating self-destruct sequences." Director Xylos found his voice first. You did this." Jackson nodded once, already moving to apply emergency treatment to the leader's most critical injuries. The facility should be secure now. Their force consisted of 17 combatants, 12 standard raiders, 3 lieutenants, the leader, and 1 pilot still with their ship. "I've neutralized 16. The pilot is likely unaware of their failure." "Ow!" Security Chief Grawl began, then stopped, lacking words to continue. Jackson continued working as he spoke, his hands steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "You should send a team to secure the landing bay. And I'll need a proper medical team here in the next 3 minutes if we want to keep the leader alive for questioning." His tone was so matter-of-fact, so professionally detached, that it took a moment for the full impact of what they were seeing to register. A supposedly C-class human medic had single-handedly neutralized an elite Iron Scale raiding party, the same raiders that had decimated trained security teams. And now, covered in enemy blood, he was calmly providing medical care to those same enemies. The aftermath of the Iron Scale attack brought a flurry of activity to the Coalition. Medical facility. Emergency repairs commenced immediately. Wounded personnel and patients were treated, and a special containment unit was established for the captured Iron Scales. Through it all, Jackson Moore continued his duties as if nothing unusual had happened. He treated injuries, assisted in surgeries, and filed meticulously detailed reports on the medical conditions of everyone involved, including comprehensive notes on the unique challenges of treating cybernetically enhanced Iron Scale physiology. 3 days after the attack, Jackson was summoned to a secure conference room where a special inquiry had been convened. Present were Director Xylos, Security Chief Grawl, Commander Tazvex, and 2 stern-looking Coalition intelligence officers, a Novan crystalline entity and a Trillian empath. "Mr. Moore," Director Xylos began formally. "Or should I say, Lieutenant Commander Moore." Jackson showed no reaction to the use of his military rank. He simply sat, back straight, hands folded on the table. "Your actual service record has been transmitted from Earth authorities," continued Xylos, activating a holographic display. 12 years in Earth Special Forces. Specialized training in combat medicine, counterterrorism, and advanced tactical operations. Deployed to 17 high-conflict zones. Expert in 7 forms of combat. And qualified to operate 43 different weapon systems. He paused, silver eyes fixed on Jackson, none of which was disclosed in your exchange program application. "With respect, Director, it wasn't concealed either," Jackson replied calmly. "My application stated I had experience in high-stress medical environments and emergency response situations. Earth authorities assumed the Coalition would conduct its own background verification. When you didn't, we took it as tacit acceptance." The Novan intelligence officer's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been indignation. "This was deliberate infiltration." "No," Jackson corrected. "This was resource allocation. Earth has limited slots in the exchange program. Sending someone with both medical and security expertise maximized the potential benefit." "Benefit?" Security Chief Grawl rumbled. "You deceived us." Jackson met his gaze steadily. "I saved your facility, Chief Grawl, and I did it without compromising my role as a medical professional. Every Iron Scale raider is alive and receiving appropriate treatment. The fact remains," interjected Commander Tazvex, "that you are not merely the medic you presented yourself to be. You're a trained military operative with lethal capabilities." "I'm both," Jackson said simply. "On Earth, combat medics are first and foremost healers. We're trained to preserve life, even in the most hostile environments. Sometimes that means we must also be capable of neutralizing threats." The Trillian empath, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. Her large, luminous eyes studied Jackson intently. "He speaks truth," she said finally. His primary identity is as a healer. The warrior aspects are secondary, tools to accomplish his primary purpose. A rather effective set of secondary tools, noted director Xylos dryly. The security footage is impressive. Jackson shrugged slightly. I did what was necessary. The question, said Commander Tazvex, is what to do with you now. Your presence has created a significant diplomatic situation. Some coalition species are disturbed by the idea of weaponized medicine, as they're calling it, while others, countered Director Xylos, are expressing interest in this combat medic concept. The Althean Medical Council has already requested information on training protocols, and security divisions are questioning why we didn't implement similar approaches years ago, added Grawl, sounding both irritated and reluctantly impressed. The debate continued for hours. Some argued that Jackson should be immediately removed from the facility as a security risk. Others pointed out that his actions had saved the facility, its personnel, and potentially prevented the Iron Scales from acquiring dangerous medical technology. Through it all, Jackson remained calm, answering questions directly and without defensiveness. Yes, he had specialized combat training. No, he had never compromised medical ethics, even during military operations. Yes, he understood the concerns about weaponizing medical knowledge, but pointed out that defensive applications were sometimes necessary to fulfill the healer's oath. The real question, he said finally, when the circular arguments seemed to be reaching exhaustion, is whether the coalition is willing to recognize that sometimes protecting life requires more than passive defense. Medicine isn't just about healing after harm occurs. It's also about preventing harm when possible. His words hung in the air, challenging centuries of coalition medical doctrine that had kept healing and defense as strictly separate disciplines. A week later, the Coalition Council rendered its decision. Jackson Moore would remain at the facility, but with a modified role. He would continue his medical duties, but would also establish a training program for what they tentatively termed medical security protocols, teaching medical personnel basic defensive techniques without compromising their primary healing mission. The program started small, just a handful of curious doctors and nurses from various species. Dr. Tin was among the first volunteers, her natural Althean curiosity overcoming initial reservations. I still don't understand how you can reconcile these two aspects, she said during an early training session. Healer and warrior seem fundamentally opposed. Jackson was demonstrating how to modify a standard medical scanner to temporarily disrupt hostile cybernetic systems, a non-lethal defensive technique. They're not opposed, he explained. They're complementary. Think of it this way. When a patient has a dangerous infection, what do? Eliminate the infection, Ilera answered immediately. Exactly. You target the threat precisely while preserving the patient. That's all I did with the Iron Scales. The threat was neutralized with minimal harm. But you were covered in their blood, she pointed out. That suggests significant harm was involved. Jackson smiled slightly. Cybernetic fluid looks dramatic, but most of what you saw was coolant and hydraulic fluid, not biological components. The techniques I used specifically targeted mechanical systems while preserving organic tissue. It looked worse than it was. As the weeks passed, the program expanded. Security Chief Grawl, initially the most skeptical, became one of its strongest advocates after seeing how medical knowledge could enhance defensive capabilities without increasing lethality. Your human approach is unorthodox, he admitted grudgingly during a joint training exercise, but effective. Our security teams now have non-lethal options they never considered before. Not everyone was convinced. A vocal minority, particularly among the more traditionally pacifistic species, continued to express concern about the militarization of medicine. Formal protests were filed with the Coalition Council, demanding Jackson's removal and the termination of his program. The debate reached its peak during a specially convened medical ethics summit 3 months after the Iron Scale attack. Representatives from 27 species gathered to debate what some were calling the human paradox, how to reconcile healing arts with defensive capabilities. Jackson, now officially recognized as Security Medical Liaison, was called to testify. He entered the Grand Council chamber aware of the hundreds of alien eyes tracking his movements, some curious, some hostile, some calculating. Lieutenant Commander Moore, began the Xenthian counselor who chaired the ethics committee. Your presence has forced us to confront uncomfortable questions about the relationship between healing and harm. Many here believe you have corrupted the purity of medical practice with military tactics. Jackson took a moment before responding, scanning the assembled representatives. With respect, Counselor, I believe that perspective reveals a luxury the Coalition has enjoyed that we on Earth have not. Explain, demanded the counselor. Earth has been a contested environment throughout our history, Jackson said. Our medical practices evolved not in peaceful research facilities, but on battlefields, in disaster zones, and during crises. Our healers learned that sometimes, to save 10 lives, you must incapacitate one aggressor. To maintain a sterile field for surgery, you might need to neutralize environmental threats. He paused, letting his words sink in. The Iron Scale attack demonstrated that the Coalition now faces similar realities. Medical facilities are no longer considered neutral, untouchable grounds by all parties. The question isn't whether medicine should remain pure. It's whether medical personnel should have the tools to fulfill their primary mission when threats emerge. A Thraxian representative rose, iridescent scales flashing with agitation. You speak of tools, but we all witnessed the security footage. You dispatch trained warriors with terrifying efficiency. How can we trust someone with such capabilities to honor medical ethics? By looking at outcomes rather than methods, Jackson replied calmly. Every Iron Scale raider I encountered survived. All received immediate medical attention after being neutralized. Compare that to conventional security responses, which resulted in 7 Iron Scale fatalities and 3 permanently disabled survivors. The debate continued for hours, passionate and occasionally heated. Jackson remained composed throughout, neither defensive nor aggressive in his responses. He simply presented facts that the modified program had already reduced casualty rates in 3 subsequent security incidents, that medical personnel reported feeling more confident knowing they had options beyond passivity in dangerous situations, that patient outcomes improved when medics could create safe treatment environments. Gradually, a consensus began to emerge. While not everyone embraced the combat medic concept fully, most recognized that changing circumstances required adaptation. The Coalition Council ultimately approved an expanded program, carefully regulated and ethically monitored to train volunteer medical personnel in defensive techniques. 6 months after the Iron Scale attack, the Coalition Medical Facility had been transformed. New security protocols integrated medical knowledge into defensive systems. Treatment areas included subtle but effective protective measures, and medical personnel moved with a new confidence, knowing they had options beyond evacuation if threats emerged. Jackson Moore, now officially designated as the facility's medical security director, was conducting a training session for a mixed group of medical and security personnel when Director Xylos entered the observation room. Below, Jackson was demonstrating to a fascinated audience how standard surgical adhesive could be used to temporarily immobilize an aggressor without causing permanent harm. The key, he explained, is application to jointed surfaces with minimal skin contact. This limits the compound's ability to bond with organic tissue while maximizing mechanical restriction. Director Xylos watched alongside Dr. Tin, who had become one of the program's strongest advocates. He has changed us, the director observed, in ways I'm still not certain I fully understand. Dr. Tin's scales shimmered thoughtfully. I believe he's reminded us of something our specialized society had forgotten, that sometimes preservation requires active intervention, that healing and protection are not separate disciplines, but points on a continuum. A dangerous continuum, Xylos noted. Any tool can be dangerous, Ilera countered. A surgical laser can heal or harm. The difference lies in intention and application. She gestured toward Jackson, who was now patiently helping a Medusan medic adjust her grip on a modified medical injector. His intentions have never wavered. First, do no harm, but prevent harm when possible. As if sensing their observation, Jackson glanced up at the window. Gone was the carefully neutral expression of the C-class medic, who had arrived months earlier. In its place was the confident focus of someone fully integrated into his purpose, neither hiding his capabilities nor flaunting them. The Coalition Intelligence Service has approached him twice, Director Xylos revealed. They want him to train specialized medical operatives for high-risk environments. Will he accept? Xylos made the Xynthian gesture for uncertainty. He said his place is here, teaching fundamentals. That specialized operations would come later, once the foundation is properly established. Below, the training session concluded. As the participants filed out, a young Valaxian security officer approached Jackson with a question that drifted up to the observation room. "But how do you reconcile it?" the officer asked. "Being both healer and fighter?" Jackson considered the question seriously. "I don't see them as separate identities. Both serve the same purpose, preserving life. Sometimes that means repairing damage after it occurs. Sometimes it means preventing damage before it happens. The method changes, the mission doesn't." Later that evening, Jackson sat alone in the facility's observation lounge, watching the strange configurations of alien stars through the panoramic viewport. The door slid open, and Security Chief Grawl entered, his massive frame silhouetted against the corridor lights. "More," he acknowledged, joining the human at the viewport. "Chief," Jackson returned with a nod. "Everything secure? As much as anything can be in this sector." Grawl settled his bulk into a reinforced chair. "The latest intelligence suggests the iron scales are regrouping in the Carrion Nebula. They've apparently modified their cybernetic interfaces to be more resistant to medical intervention." Jackson nodded. "Adaptation is natural. We'll adjust our protocols accordingly." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching distant starships move across the void. "I didn't trust you," Grawl said finally, "when you first arrived. I know. I still have questions about why Earth sent you specifically, and why they weren't transparent about your background." Jackson turned to face the security chief. "Some things aren't shared because they're secret, Chief. They're not shared because they're difficult to explain without demonstration. If Earth had said they were sending a combat medic, what would you have imagined?" Grawl considered. "This. A warrior with minimal medical training. A fighter who could apply emergency treatments." "Exactly. Not a fully qualified medical professional who also possesses defensive capabilities. The concept didn't exist in Coalition terminology. And now it does," Grawl acknowledged, though many still struggle with it. Jackson smiled slightly. "Change takes time, but necessity is persuasive." As they continued their conversation, neither noticed Dr. Tin pausing in the doorway, watching the improbable friendship between the facility's most martial security chief and the human who had arrived as just a medic but had transformed their understanding of what medicine could be. 6 months earlier, the sight of Jackson more covered in enemy blood had represented a shocking contradiction, a healer stained with the evidence of combat. Now, it had become a powerful symbol of a new approach to an ancient calling, the protection of life through whatever means necessary. The next morning, Jackson stood before a new group of medical trainees, a diverse collection of species, each with their own healing traditions and ethical frameworks. As he prepared to begin the session, he noticed Dr. Tin enter with a group of visiting dignitaries from the Coalition Medical Council. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all designations, he began with a formal address that acknowledged the vast diversity before him. "Welcome to Integrated Medical Security Training. Before we begin, I want to clarify something important." He paused, meeting the eyes, visual sensors, or sensory organs of each participant. "The techniques you'll learn here don't turn you into warriors. They don't compromise your identity as healers. They expand your ability to fulfill your primary mission, preserving life, even in hostile environments." He activated a holographic display showing medical facilities across Coalition space. Our calling remains the same as it has always been. Only our methods adapt to meet changing threats. And if someday you find yourself momentarily covered in the fluid of those who would harm your patients, he smiled slightly. Remember that your purpose never changed. You're still a medic, just one with additional tools. As the session began, Director Xylos leaned toward Dr. Tin and whispered, "I still find it remarkable. One human has fundamentally altered centuries of coalition medical doctrine." Dr. Tin watched as Jackson patiently demonstrated a technique that allowed even the physically weakest medical practitioners to create a safe treatment zone. "Perhaps we needed altering," she replied softly. "The universe rarely allows theory to remain untested forever. Better to adapt willingly than be forced to change in crisis." As the training session continued into practical exercises, Jackson moved among the diverse group of medical personnel, adjusting a grip here, suggesting a modification there. His approach was always gentle but firm, never imposing human techniques wholesale, but instead helping each species adapt the principles to their unique physiologies and capabilities. A young Medusan nurse struggled with a defensive maneuver, her tentacles not quite coordinating in the human design sequence. "Don't force it," Jackson advised, crouching beside her. "Your natural mobility gives you advantages humans don't have. Try this instead." He demonstrated an alternative that utilized the Medusan's flexible appendages more effectively. When she successfully executed the move, her bioluminescent patterns flashed with pride. Across the room, a Thraxian doctor with natural armored plating practiced a technique for creating a portable shield barrier using standard medical equipment. "Remember," Jackson called out, "your natural defenses are already superior to most species. Focus on protecting your patients, not yourself." The coalition dignitaries watched with varying expressions of interest, concern, and reluctant admiration. "I'm still troubled by the philosophical implications," murmured an elderly Xenthian medical ethicist. "For millennia, we've maintained strict separation between healers and defenders. As did humans once," Director Xylos replied. Dr. Moore explained that their combat medic tradition emerged from necessity. Battlefields where the wounded would die without immediate treatment, but where traditional medical personnel were too vulnerable to function. "A brutal crucible," the ethicist acknowledged. "But an effective one," countered another dignitary, a scarred Valaxian who had served in numerous border conflicts. "I've lost too many field medics who had knowledge, but no defensive capabilities." This integrated approach, it has merit. The debate among the visitors continued quietly as Jackson concluded the basic training session. As the medical personnel filed out, many nodding respectfully to the human instructor, Security Chief Grawl entered with a datapad in hand. His expression was grim. "New intelligence," he rumbled, waiting until the room had cleared except for Jackson, Director Xylos, and Dr. Tin. "The iron scales have upgraded significantly. Reports suggest they've incorporated stolen Althean regenerative tech with their cybernetics." Dr. Tin's scales paled. "That would make them nearly impossible to incapacitate using our current methods. Wounds would close almost instantly." "Exactly," Grawl confirmed. "And they've been spotted in the Nixian sector. 3 outposts have gone dark." "The Nixian sector," Director Xylos murmured. "That's one jump away," Jackson finished, his expression thoughtful rather than concerned. "How long until coalition response forces can reach the area?" "At least 12 hours, Grawl said. "And that's assuming immediate deployment authorization, which the Council will debate for at least that long again." Jackson nodded, his mind already shifting into tactical assessment. "Then we need to prepare for the possibility they'll reach us before reinforcement arrive." He turned to Director Xylos. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to implement Security Protocol Omega." The director hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Granted, but the visitors will need to be included in our preparations," Jackson said firmly. "They're here now, which makes them our responsibility." As they dispersed to begin emergency preparations, the coalition dignitaries were startled by the sudden shift in the facility's operations. What had been a routine observation visit was rapidly transforming into a front-row seat to crisis management. "What exactly is happening?" demanded the Xinthian ethicist as medical staff hurried past with equipment. "We're preparing for a potential iron scale incursion," Dr. Tin explained, her professional calm a testament to the training she'd received. "Security Protocol Omega converts our medical facility into a defensible position while maintaining full treatment capabilities." "You can't be serious," protested a Novan representative, their crystalline form vibrating with alarm. "This is a healing center, not a fortress." "It's both now," Jackson said, joining them with a stack of modified medical devices. "And that duality may save lives today. We have patients who can't be evacuated and staff who've chosen to remain with them. Our job is to ensure they survive." Over the next 2 hours, the facility transformed. Treatment areas were consolidated into more defensible configurations. Medical scanners were recalibrated to detect iron-scale cybernetic signatures. Pharmaceutical dispensaries were secured with additional protocols. Throughout it all, Jackson moved with calm efficiency, directing both medical and security personnel in an integrated defense plan. The coalition visitors found themselves caught up in the preparations, some offering assistance based on their own specialties, others observing with growing fascination as the theoretical concepts they'd been debating manifested in practical application. "Notice how the defensive measures never compromise medical functionality," Dr. Tin pointed out to the still skeptical ethicist. "The treatment areas remain fully operational, just more secure." "And the medical staff?" the ethicist asked, watching as nurses and doctors checked modified equipment alongside security protocols. "Are still healers first," Dr. Tin assured him. "But now they have options beyond hiding or dying if threats materialize." For hours into the preparations, the alert came. Long-range sensors had detected a vessel with iron-scale signatures dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Its trajectory placed the facility directly in its path. "Estimated arrival, 47 minutes," announced the monitoring officer. In the command center, Jackson stood with Director Xylos, Security Chief Grawl, and the senior medical staff, reviewing final preparations. "We've done everything possible," Grawl stated, his natural armor plates flexed in readiness. "The question is whether it will be enough against their enhanced regeneration capabilities." "Regeneration has limitations," Jackson said thoughtfully. "Even Althean tech requires energy and raw materials. Every healing response depletes resources." Dr. Tin's eyes widened as she followed his reasoning. "You're suggesting we adjust our approach, target their ability to regenerate rather than trying to overcome it directly." Jackson nodded. "Exactly. If we can't stop them through traditional incapacitation, we make regeneration too costly for their systems to maintain." "How?" demanded Growl. "Sustained, systemic disruption," Jackson explained. "Not single, critical strikes. We target multiple systems simultaneously, force constant regenerative responses until they exhaust their capabilities." He turned to Dr. Tin. "The standard treatment for Thraxian metabolic cascade, the one that prevents runaway, cellular regeneration, could we modify it to affect iron-scale cybernetic interfaces?" The Althean doctor considered for a moment, her scientific mind racing through possibilities. "Theoretically, yes. It would require recalibrating the compound's molecular structure and delivery method, but the principle is sound." "Then that's our primary countermeasure," Jackson decided. "Let's get to work." As the medical team hurried to implement the new strategy, Director Xylos gave Jackson a considering look. This approach, exhausting their regenerative capabilities rather than trying to overcome them directly, it's not typical military thinking. "No," Jackson agreed. "It's medical thinking applied to a security problem. Why try to breach an impenetrable defense when you can simply wait for it to exhaust itself?" The director's silver eyes gleamed with understanding. "That's the true innovation of your integrated approach, isn't it? Not just teaching medical personnel defensive techniques, but applying medical principles to defense itself. The best solutions often come from cross-disciplinary thinking," Jackson replied simply. 30 minutes later, The facility was as ready as it could be. Patients had been consolidated in the most secure central wards. Medical staff, now equipped with both traditional tools and defensive modifications, were positioned strategically throughout. Security personnel, briefed on a new approach, understood their role was containment rather than direct confrontation. In the primary laboratory, Jackson and Dr. Tin finished preparing the modified compound, a pale blue liquid that shimmered slightly under the lights. "This should work," Dr. Tin said, carefully loading the substance in specially modified injectors. "But delivery will be the challenge. We need sustained contact for at least 3 seconds for full system absorption." Jackson nodded, distributing the injectors to the medical teams. "Remember, target junction points between organic and cybernetic components. Don't waste compound on purely mechanical elements." As they completed final preparations, one of the Coalition visitors, the Valaxian veteran, approached Jackson. "I request permission to assist," he said formally. "I have combat experience and medical training." Jackson studied him briefly before nodding. "Take position with Team 3. They're covering the secondary entrance to the critical care unit." More surprisingly, the Xinthian ethicist who had been most vocal in his philosophical objections also stepped forward. "I cannot engage in combat," he stated, "but I'm a qualified surgeon. I can free your medical personnel for other duties." "Thank you," Jackson said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "Dr. Kylos will show you to the surgical unit." As the minutes ticked down, Jackson made a final round through the facility, checking positions, adjusting equipment, and offering quiet words of encouragement. When he reached the central ward where Dr. Tin was reviewing emergency protocols with her team, he paused. "This isn't what you signed up for when you joined a medical facility," he acknowledged. Dr. Tin's scales rippled in what had become her equivalent of a shrug. "Perhaps not initially, but I've come to understand that medicine doesn't exist in isolation from the realities around it. Sometimes healing means preventing harm before it occurs." Jackson smiled slightly. "You sound like an Earth combat medic now." "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied, testing the weight of a modified medical scanner in her hand. "Though I still prefer my patients unconscious rather than trying to kill me." "Don't we all?" Jackson agreed with a brief laugh. Their moment of levity was interrupted by the facility-wide alert. The Iron Scale vessel had entered orbit. Breach was imminent. Unlike the previous attack, this one began with precision rather than brute force. The Iron Scales, apparently having learned from their earlier failure, targeted specific systems, communications first, then external sensors, then power distribution. Each strike was surgical, designed to isolate the facility without destroying it. In the command center, Jackson and Security Chief Grawl tracked the methodical approach. "They're being careful this time," Grawl observed. "No frontal assault." "They've adapted," Jackson agreed. "But so have we." The first breach came not through the main entrances, but via the environmental control system, a maintenance duct that even Grawl's enhanced security had considered too small for access. The Iron Scales proved this assumption wrong when 3 of them, their cybernetic bodies somehow compressing to fit the narrow space, emerged in the lower levels. "First contact, Section 12B," reported a security officer. 3 hostiles heavily enhanced. Jackson keyed his communicator. "Medical Team 4, converge on Section 12B. Security, containment protocol only let the medical team handle." Neutralization. On the security feeds, they watched as the scenario played out exactly as Jackson had predicted. The Iron Scales, confident in their enhanced regenerative capabilities, advanced aggressively, shrugging off conventional security measures. When wounded, their injuries sealed almost instantly, cybernetic components rebuilding in seconds. Then the medical team arrived. Rather than attacking directly, they implemented the new strategy: multiple, simultaneous delivery of the modified compound, targeting different organic cybernetic interfaces on each raider. The effect wasn't immediate, but cumulative. The first injections seemed to have minimal impact, but as the medical team maintained pressure, applying compound after compound to different systems, the Iron Scale's regenerative capabilities began to falter. "It's working," Grawl said, watching as the raiders slowed, their movements becoming jerky as their systems diverted more and more energy to healing responses. First phase, Jackson corrected. Now comes the metabolic cascade. On screen, the iron scales suddenly collapsed, their enhanced bodies convulsing as the compound triggered a systemic failure, not destroying their cybernetics, but forcing their regenerative functions into overdrive until they exhausted available resources. Medical team, 4 reports hostiles neutralized, came the update. No casualties on our side. Jackson nodded in satisfaction. Have them secure the iron scales for treatment. Full medical protocols. They're patients now, not just prisoners. This pattern repeated as more iron scales breached the facility, each group confident in their enhancements, each ultimately overwhelmed by the medical countermeasures. The facility's integrated defense strategy proved devastatingly effective against enemies who had expected either pure military resistance or no resistance at all. 2 hours into the assault, the Iron Scale commander himself led the final push, a massive figure with even more extensive enhancements than his predecessor, targeting the central laboratory directly. He's after the research data, Director Xylos realized, and the regenerative compounds. Then that's where we'll meet him, Jackson said, grabbing a medical kit. Chief Grawl, Dr. Tin with me. The confrontation in the laboratory was brief but intense. The Iron Scale commander, learning from previous failures, came prepared with countermeasures against standard security protocols. What he hadn't anticipated was the integrated medical security approach. While Grawl's security team provided containment, Jackson and Dr. Tin implemented their medical strategy, not trying to defeat the commander's overwhelming strength, but systematically exhausting his enhanced capabilities. You think your treatments can overcome my enhancements? The commander snarled, cybernetic eye glowing fierce red as regenerative systems repaired damage almost instantly. I've been specifically designed to counter your tactics. That's the problem with designing countermeasures, Jackson replied calmly, applying another compound to his secondary system. You focus on what you've seen before, not what might come next. As the commander's regenerative capabilities finally began to falter, his expression shifted from confidence to confusion to something approaching fear. What have you done to me? He demanded as his systems finally cascaded into failure. Jackson was already administering stabilizing compounds as the Iron Scale collapsed. Saved your life, he answered simply. Your enhancements were killing you, burning through resources faster than your organic components could sustain. The final Iron Scale forces, receiving no further commands from their leader, retreated to their vessel and fled the system, leaving behind nearly 30 of their enhanced warriors, all now in medical stasis under the facility's care. The aftermath brought a flurry of activity as coalition forces finally arrived, 12 hours late but in significant numbers. The facility's successful defense, with minimal casualties on either side, became an instant case study in integrated security approaches. More significant, however, was the impact on the Coalition Medical Council representatives who had witnessed the entire incident firsthand. I've spent 5 decades arguing against the militarization of medicine, the Xinthian ethicist admitted as they gathered in the debriefing session. Today I witnessed something that challenges everything I believed. What I saw wasn't medicine corrupted by military thinking, but military action elevated by medical principles. The Valaxian veteran nodded in agreement. In traditional combat, our success would be measured in enemy dead. Today it's measured in lives preserved on both sides. Director Xylos turned to Jackson, who sat quietly at the end of the table, still wearing his blood-spattered medical uniform. Lieutenant Commander Moore, the Coalition owes you a debt of gratitude that extends beyond this single incident. You've shown us a new path forward. Jackson shook his head slightly. I didn't create this approach. Earth's combat medics have operated on these principles for generations, balancing the imperative to heal with the necessity of defense. I simply had the opportunity to demonstrate its value in a new context. And that demonstration will change coalition medicine forever, Dr. Tin added, her scales shimmering with emphasis. The council is already drafting protocols for integrated medical security training across all major facilities. As the meeting concluded, the coalition representatives filed out, many pausing to thank Jackson personally. When only he, Grawl, and Dr. Tin remained, the security chief finally asked the question that had been bothering him. Was this Earth's plan all along? To introduce this combat medic concept to the coalition through a practical demonstration. Jackson considered the question honestly, not specifically. Earth authorities knew my background might prove useful beyond standard medical exchange, but no one anticipated the iron scale attacks. He paused, though I suspect they won't be entirely disappointed with the outcome. Meaning, Grawl prompted, Earth has been seeking greater integration into coalition security operations for years, Jackson explained. Demonstrating unique value is one way to achieve that. Dr. Tin's scales flickered with amusement. So we gained medical security integration, and Earth gained political leverage. Efficient. I prefer to think everyone gained something more valuable, Jackson replied. A new perspective on an old problem. Medicine has always been about preserving life. Sometimes that requires more than traditional healing. The next morning, Jackson found himself in an unexpected position, leading a formal presentation to the expanded Coalition Medical Council, hastily convened to address what they were now calling the Integrated Medical Defense Paradigm. As he stood before representatives from dozens of species, many still processing the implications of what they'd witnessed, Jackson was struck by how far things had come from his arrival as a supposedly unremarkable C-class medic. The principles of combat medicine are straightforward, he began, addressing the attentive audience. First, preserve life, your patients, your teams, your own, and yes, even your adversaries when possible. Second, recognize that sometimes preserving life requires active intervention against threats. And third, never compromise your identity as a healer, even when circumstances force you to defend. He activated a holographic display showing the modified medical equipment that had proved so effective against the enhanced iron scales. These tools represent the practical application of those principles. Each is designed primarily for healing, with defensive capabilities as a secondary function. The innovation isn't in the technology, it's in the philosophy behind it. For the next hour, Jackson detailed the training protocols, ethical frameworks, and practical applications of the integrated approach. The questions from the council were probing, thoughtful, and increasingly focused not on whether to adopt these methods, but how to implement them effectively across diverse species and medical traditions. As the session concluded, the council president, a venerable Althean whose age showed in the faded brilliance of her scales, addressed Jackson directly. Lieutenant Commander Moore, when you first arrived, covered in enemy blood after the initial iron scale attack, many questioned whether a true healer could engage in such actions. Today, I believe we have our answer. She paused, her ancient eyes holding his steadily. The highest calling of medicine has always been to preserve life. You have simply shown us that sometimes that preservation requires capabilities we had long separated from healing arts. The formal adoption of the integrated medical defense protocols throughout coalition space took place 3 months later. Jackson Moore, now officially designated as the coalition's first medical security administrator, oversaw the implementation with the same calm efficiency he'd brought to everything else. On the day the first class of formally trained coalition combat medics graduated from the newly established academy, Jackson stood with Dr. Tin, Security Chief Grawl, and Director Xylos, watching as representatives from 17 species receive their certifications. So, Grawl rumbled, "Are you satisfied with what you've accomplished here?" Jackson watched as the graduates, doctors, nurses, and medical technicians who had voluntarily expanded their skills to include defensive capabilities, took their oaths, promising to remain healers first while accepting the responsibility to protect. "It's a good start," he said simply, "though I expect we'll keep refining the approach as we face new challenges." Always adapting, Dr. Tin observed with a flicker of amusement in her scales. "Very human of you. Very medical of me," Jackson corrected with a smile. Good medicine always adapts to changing conditions. As the ceremony concluded, a young Medusan graduate approached Jackson, her tentacles arranged in the pattern that indicated respect and gratitude. "Thank you, Administrator Moore," she said through a translator. "Before your program, I felt I had to choose between honoring my healing traditions and protecting those under my care. Now I understand they are aspects of the same commitment." Jackson nodded in acknowledgement. "That's the essence of what we do. Remember, you're still a medic, even when circumstances require more than traditional healing." Later, as the facility settled into evening operations, Jackson paused in a quiet corridor, looking out at the stars visible through a viewport. So much had changed in the relatively short time since his arrival, not just for the Coalition, but for him personally. He had come as an exchange officer with a specific mission, introduced the combat meta concept to Coalition species. He had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, including his own. But the experience had changed him too, deepened his understanding of what it meant to balance healing and protection across species with radically different ethical frameworks. Dr. Tin found him there, her approach silent as always. "Contemplating your success?" she asked, joining him at the viewport. "Contemplating change," he replied, "and constants." "Such as?" "The constants are simple," Jackson said. "The need to heal, the need to protect, the sometimes difficult space between them." He turned to her. "The changes are in how we navigate that space, how we maintain our identity as healers even when circumstances demand more." Dr. Tin's scales shimmered with understanding. "And how do you maintain that identity, Jackson, when you're covered in enemy blood but still call yourself a medic?" Jackson considered the question thoughtfully. "By remembering the purpose behind the action. Everything I did, even the combat, served the primary mission, preserving life. The methods changed, the mission didn't." Dr. Tin nodded slowly. "A lesson our medical traditions needed to learn, perhaps. That preservation sometimes requires intervention, not just reaction." As they stood together watching distant stars, the facility continued its work around them, healing the sick, treating the injured, and now preparing to defend itself if necessary. The integration Jackson had brought was no longer revolutionary, but simply part of how the Coalition approached medicine in a complex universe. Somewhere in the facility, Coalition combat medics, a term that would have been considered contradictory just months earlier, went about their duties, carrying forward the philosophy that Jackson had introduced, that sometimes preserving life required more than traditional healing. And if circumstances ever again required a healer to become temporarily bloodied in defense of those under their care, they would do so without contradiction, for they understood, as Jackson had shown them, that the essence of medicine remained constant even when its expression adapted to necessity. The human had been supposed to be just a medic. That he sometimes returned from his work covered in enemy blood no longer seemed a paradox, but simply another facet of the ultimate medical commitment, the preservation of life through whatever means necessary.